Shabbat Shalom. Today our portion is called Haazinu, and I've entitled it, Why Do the Nations Rage Against Israel? There was one verse in our parasha that stood out to me. It says, when the Most High gave nations their homes and set the division of humanity, God fixed the boundaries of peoples in relation to Israel's numbers. That's from Deuteronomy 32:8. I've read this before, but this time, in light of all that is happening in the world today, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Throughout human history, one nation after another has gone to war to capture territory and people in order to expand its own, some for practical reasons and others for mere power. However, the wars that have been waged time and again against a people called Israel have never been about territory or adding people to their numbers. Rather, it's been about annihilating this people. Today, they may protest that it's over land that they insist belongs to them, but the facts paint quite a different picture. So what does it mean God fixed the boundaries of peoples in relation to Israel's numbers? One opinion I read states, as it stands, this verse implies that God divided all of humanity into a certain number of nations according to the number of Israelites. So many assume this means that God established 70 nations that we read in Genesis 10 to match Jacob's 70 offspring from Exodus 1:5. Another view was that Israel is a microcosm of the world. Just as there is diversity within Israel, so there is diversity in the world. Now, this last view to me was an extraordinary revelation and shows just how important Israel is in God's eye. In fact, scriptures call us the apple or the pupil of God's eye. Do we realize our importance? I tremble at the understanding that we are all the microcosm, that we are the microcosm of the world. Israel is the microcosm of the world. The Jewish people are the microcosm of the world. But this reveals to us just how responsible we are for the status quo of the nations of the world. And perhaps this demonstrates why things have happened to us and continue to happen to us the way they do. Such as on October 7th, 2023. There was such a virulent attack upon Israel since the Holocaust that the people there and around the world are still reeling from it. Did it have anything to do with land? Absolutely not. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon made sure that every last Jew was removed from Gaza, leaving behind thriving businesses and their homes. Not one Israeli was left in Gaza. That attack goes much deeper than land. The Middle East has always been a hotbed of jealousy and rivalry since biblical times, when Israel was first established as a nation by God himself. The Hebrew scriptures are replete with stories of how jealousy sparked violence. It began with the first two sons of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. What happened? Out of sheer gratitude and taught well by his parents, who knew the results of disobeying the warnings of their God, Abel brought the best of his flock to honor him. It says that Cain, however, just brought an offering. Cain's was rejected because of his intentions. Did he think he could fool God? Cain was so angry that in a fit of jealousy, he murdered his brother. Circumstances may change over the millennia, but the principles remain the same. The nations may rage over while Israel was chosen and accepted by God, believing that they were not. Yet this verse, God fixed the boundaries of peoples in relation to Israel's numbers, tells a different story. That God loves all his creation, and that there is a relationship that he established between us. In the same way that God asked Cain, "Why are you so angry?" The psalmist in Psalm 2:1 asks, "Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain?" The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers gather together against the Lord and his anointed. Christians may use this to point to Jesus Christ, but the kings of the earth never took their stand against Rabbi Yeshua, whose name and character they later changed. They have always fought against God's chosen people, out of jealousy and thinking that they have not been chosen. This is the furthest thing from the truth, for their boundaries were also fixed by God, and each one is special in God's sight. They simply did not have Israel's role. Jealousy drove Joseph's brother to plot against him, but instead of murdering him, they sold him to Midianite slave traders. God used this for good, for in the end, he was able to save his family as well as all the other nations in the region at the time of the Great Famine. Psalm 2 continues in verse 10. Now therefore, O you kings, be wise, be admonished, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Do homage in purity, lest he be angry and you perish on the way, when suddenly his wrath is kindled. Happy, ashrei, are all those who take refuge in him. In Rabbi Yeshua's Sermon on the Mount, he quoted these Hebrew scriptures using ashrei. Happy are the poor in spirit, happy are those who mourn, and so on. He was exhorting his people to return to the Torah. Our prophet Isaiah told us in 52:7, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the messenger bringing good news, announcing peace, the harbinger of good tidings, announcing salvation, that says to Zion, your God reigns. Israel was chosen to be that messenger of good news, first to its own people. That says to Zion, your God reigns, and then to the rest of the world. But how many people want to hear this today? After World War II, England and France didn't understand the consequences of their interference with the boundaries of people in relation to Israel's numbers. The Arabs were also unaware of the Sykes-Picot Agreement that the British and French had secretly made. Through this agreement, Britain and France divided the Middle East between themselves into areas of direct or indirect control. Britain did everything it could to keep Jews from returning to their ancestral home, and I believe that the problems they are having today are a direct consequence of this anti-Semitic behavior. On October 7th, 2 years ago, on what this day would be the first day of Sukkot, Hamas raged and plotted against God's people. They couldn't know the fury this would release upon their own. Moses' song in Haazinu is a two-sided coin. On one hand, in verse 14, he sings, Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat and gross and coarse. They forsook the God who made them and spurned the rock of their support. Yeshua too was angry with his own people because he loved them. He knew the consequences of adding and taking away from God's words. And he wanted us to return to the Torah, to do teshuvah. Yochanan ben Zechariah, later renamed John the Baptist, was immersing people in the Jordan River before Yom Kippur. He had left the temple in Jerusalem in disgust. He moved out into the desert with a group of priests who called themselves the Essenes, also disgusted by the corruption taking place there at the hands of the Pharisees and Sadducees. These men had bought their positions and were controlled by Rome. These religious elite didn't want to rock the boat, filled with power and money, and finally gave up our rebellious Rabbi Yeshua to Rome, accusing him of being a political agitator. The general population loved him and followed him wherever he went. Who are these Pharisees and Sadducees of today? Who among our people has grown fat, meaning prosperous, gross, and coarse? Who has forsaken the God who made them? At one point, every one of us, until we do teshuvah. Verse 17 sings out that they sacrificed to false gods, gods they had never known, new ones who came later. What is the first commandment? Have no other gods than the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of slavery. Again, how many want to hear that today, even in our own families? Verse 20 of this last song of Moses to his people sings out to us. God said, I will hide my face from them and see how they fare in the end, for they are a treacherous breed, children with no loyalty in them. I know what it's like to have God hide his face from me. It's the most desolate feeling imaginable. In the morning, I wished it were night, and at night, I wished it were morning. There was nowhere to find peace. These words of Moses sound harsh, and he was a desperate father, singing them out to his people so that they could go through life with hope and peace and joy, no matter how hard our enemies came at us. They also apply to us today. In verse 29 to 30, God is basically calling us a bunch of dummies. If they were wise, they would think about this and gain insight into their future. How could one have routed 1,000 or two put 10,000 to flight unless their rockets sold them that God had given them up? This is also a two-sided coin. On one hand, how could only a few Nazi guards in the camps control thousands of Jews? Why didn't they fight back? Why were they like lambs to the slaughter? And on the other hand, can one small army, the IDF, of a nation with fewer than 10 million people win a war against so many surrounding enemy nations with significantly more people? Then verse 36 shines out like a light in a dark room. For the Lord will vindicate God's people and take revenge for God's servants upon seeing that their might is gone, and neither slave nor free is left. And verse 39, see then that I am the one. There's no God beside me. I deal life and I deal death. I wound and I heal. None can deliver from my hand. Now, instead of why do the nations rage, Moses ends his song with all nations, acclaim God's people, for he'll avenge the blood of his servants, wreak vengeance on his foes, and cleanse his people's land. Now back to the beginning of the song in Deuteronomy 32:8. When the Most High gave nations their homes and set the division of humanity, God fixed the boundaries of people in nations to Israel's numbers. Do we realize how awesome a statement this is? No nation, not England, France, Germany, or the US, can divide up the world as they see fit, for only the God of Israel holds the final map of the world in his hands. And he fixes the boundaries of people in relation to Israel's number. I'll end with Isaiah 52:10. The Lord has bared his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of our God. The worse the world gets, the more I look forward to seeing this come to pass. For it may not happen in my lifetime, but then it may happen in generations to come. Shabbat Shalom.